Elden Ring's grand narrative took inspiration from our own world's long and violent political history, and its inextricable and equally violent religious history. The rise and fall of the Greek and Roman worlds went hand in hand with the eventual replacement of their gods. City-states lost political independence to empire as local gods were assimilated into pantheons, and when the empire was threatened, those pantheons were culled into monotheism to help power consolidate into autocracy. Politics and faith intertwined as they so often do. That historical summary could equally well apply to the lands between. Not to mention the iterating cycles of fracture, dark ages, religious schisms, and resurgence, culminating in an ambitious warlord ascending to become a proper lord. Bloodborne, however, tells a very different story. While it draws no less from the waxing and waning of real-life epics, its focus is on a whole new set of historical inspirations. Bloodborne draws primary inspiration from the history of science, and how those at the forefront of the scientific revolution wielded each exciting discovery with the unrestrained ambition of newfound power. That awe-inspiring feeling of omnipotence that must have been felt by those in our own world who witnessed the first splitting of the atom, the first reading of the genetic code, the first conversation with an artificial being, or indeed the first transfusion of blood between two people, would be all too familiar to Willem, Lawrence, and Mikolash. That feeling, unique to our species, of an impending brave new world of possibilities has been recurring for millennia, both in our world and in FromSoft's. From the first use of fire to cook a meal, to the first smelting of lusterless rock into shining metal, to the first taming of a wild beast into a vehicle of war, and the first scratching of utterances onto an unfleeting medium. Those technological and scientific revolutions, though lost to prehistory, each ushered in societal changes that were calamitous for those left without proper insight. These are the histories that fuel the narrative of Bloodborne, diving deep into millennia of scientific and medical history to fill Chalice Dungeon's worth of discovery and rediscovery. This narrative is colored by many personalities, the brilliant innovators at the forefront of science, technology, and medicine, the ambitious stewards of knowledge that wield its power, and those who lost themselves in the madness of ambition and boundless potential, the feeling of ascending almost to godhood. But let's not get carried away just yet. We are but humble, tarnished archaeologists after all, and you can bet we will spend inordinate amounts of time mulling over the implications of a peculiar posture on some unnamed statue. You can rest assured, fellow tarnished archaeologists, that our new expeditions into the lands of Yharnam will have no less scrutiny into the minutiae in service of revealing Bloodborne's brilliant lore. Sure, the game is 8 years old, and truly inspired people have come before us to uncover much of its beautiful story and worldly inspirations. But let's be real. Do any of us really have any clue who most of these people are depicted again and again in statues? Any idea about Mr. Whiskers over here? Any thoughts on this sad lady? And what about all those damn mirrors all over Yahar'gul? Not to mention those people that are... wait, they're in the wall, like a lot of people are in the wall. Cue in nightmares and planes of existence, friends, and we have much to talk about, indeed. So, without getting too riled up, let's ease into this and start with some classic tarnished archaeology. A simple exercise to interpret a statue, a relief, and, of course, a lintel. From those humble beginnings, the grand mystery will begin to reveal itself. Welcome to the first expedition of Bloodborne Archaeology. When Julius Caesar died in 44 BC, after being stabbed 23 times by the 23 co-conspirators of his assassination, he was publicly mourned by the Roman masses who had loved him so dearly and who had been the source of so much of his power. Though he had been given divine honors during his lifetime, specifically during his time as dictator, there was no better evidence of Caesar's divine status than the fact that, just a few short months after his assassination, during his funeral festival games, a brilliant new star appeared in the sky. What is today called Caesar's Comet is attested to in the contemporary sources as being so bright that it was even visible during daytime, and it burned for a full week during the festival. To the Romans at the time, and most importantly the ever-savvy Octavian, this was unambiguous evidence of the apotheosis, or deification, of Caesar. His soul was taken up to the realm of the gods, as the god Jupiter puts it, according to Ovid, quote, "Meanwhile, take up Caesar's spirit from his murdered corpse and change it into a star, so that the deified Julius may always look down from his high temple upon our capital and forum." End quote. The thing is, to the Romans, and indeed for many centuries even before the Romans, there would be really nothing unusual about an important event like the death of a king being marked by celestial events. For example, the Roman historian Cassius Dio claims that comet stars lit up the night sky after the death of Cleopatra. But even more famously, just a few decades after Caesar's death, comes the biblical story of the Star of Bethlehem, the heavenly object witnessed by the three wise men, or magi, who were really just astrologers if you think about it, that heralded the birth of Jesus. It is no coincidence that the death of great men and the births of divine children are often heralded by the stars. So too are celestial events the harbingers of godly intervention in Bloodborne, where the cosmic and the terrestrial, the sacred and the profane, are intermingled, at times indistinguishable, and above all else, malleable. Humans look to the cosmos in order to elevate their beings. Elevated beings are hunted and slaughtered by humans, and all the while, the ominous red moon holds sway over the minds of men, and blurs the lines distinguishing what is human from what is not. So it would make some sense then that these interactions with eldritch forces of the Great Ones may be heralded by celestial events. As we will see shortly, like Caesar's Comet and the Star of Bethlehem, the stories of birth and death are often written in the night sky. Yharnam is a truly ancient city. So ancient, in fact, that, like real-world Rome, or Aleppo, or Jerusalem, most of its history has been completely forgotten by its current inhabitants, though lingering icons bear unmistakable witness to this deep past. The Marian fountains occupy central Yharnam's plaza. Statues complete with mysterious messengers adorn the various avenues and bridges of the city. Canehurst sigils dot houses in the cathedral ward, attesting to a lost, shared heritage. The altar of Old Yharnam containing ritual blood is unmistakably Marian, and so too is the altar in the Grand Cathedral. All of these are ancient, repurposed relics, physical proof of Yharnam's deep and mostly forgotten past. Over the course of this series, we will excavate Yharnam's past in order to better understand its present, and in so doing we will tell the stories of many of those ancient relics. But we begin today in the oldest part of this old city. deep in the long-abandoned valley hamlet where lies the untold story of Yharnam's history. The Church of the Good Chalice, as it is now named, is of a much older stratum of the city, built over and consumed by the newly sprawling upper metropolis, so much so that Upper Yharnam has engulfed its now dilapidated ruins, in the kind of cannibalistic cityscape that one only finds in the truly ancient cities of the world. And within this church lies an altar depicting one of the most mysterious, but ultimately revealing, scenes in the entire game. Here we have depicted an apparent funeral scene of a man, wrapped in a burial shroud in preparation for his entombment, surrounded by mourning women and, naturally, a tombstone. The circumferential lower frieze likewise appears to show a funeral scene, with dozens of attendants and mourners attesting to the social status of this man. Whoever he was a man of great importance to the townsfolk at the time. But there is something deeply odd about this depiction, for there appears to be some acute event which occurs during the funeral, which distracts and interrupts the mourners. Whatever it was, this event clearly surprised the subjects of the scene, for in the midst of burying this man, their gaze is abruptly diverted towards the sky, and some off-scene event. And so the scene, now immortalized in stone, commemorates not just the man who is being mourned, but whatever celestial event interrupted his funeral. Perhaps, like Caesar's comet, this sign from the heavens is an indication of the deification of the dead man. The nature of this interruption might otherwise be forever mysterious if not for the flanking statues, both of which show hunched, bandaged, and cloaked characters with one very specific and distinctive feature. Their overly prominent, almost cartoonishly large, upturned noses, as if these clerics are smelling something above them. If you've played the game, what that something is no mystery. Several characters, from Ariana to Annalise, can actually smell our character, specifically the distinctive scent of contact with the moon presence.
Oh my, what a queer scent. But I'll take it over the stench of blood and beasts any day.
Visitor. Moon-scented hunter.
Moonlit scents. How did you worm your way in here?
Ariana says we have a, quote, queer scent, end quote, which she prefers to the smell of blood and beasts, meaning that the smell of the moon is a distinct smell from that of beasts. Imposter Yusevka notes our, quote, moonlit scents, end quote, when we interrupt her work before the red moon, and Queen Annalise calls us a, quote, moon-scented hunter, end quote. It's no coincidence that each of these characters is female, but we'll come back to that in a bit. For now, let's just point out that the moon, and those associated with it, can literally be smelled. This knowledge unifies the scene in the Church of the Good Chalice. The funeral of this great man, whoever he was interrupted by the arrival of the moon. Its reproduction in monumental form means this scene is of great importance to the old religion of Old Yharnam, and it's not hard to see why. This was their first contact with the moon. But it is so much more than just an arrival scene. To reveal the deeper mysteries of this scene, we must build its context by analyzing the other characters, starting with its main subject in center frame. The female character from this moon-scented scene is shown countless times in statues, lintels, and reliefs throughout the city. From this fact, we can glean that clearly she is a woman of critical importance to the old religion in Yharnam. We say Old Religion because her visage is found most prominently in Old Yharnam, or on the path to it, in Hemwick, or in Central Yharnam, but is conspicuously absent in the Cathedral Ward, where it has been replaced by other iconography we'll address a bit later. Cathedral Ward is the area of the city with the most recent transformation, specifically by the arrival of Lawrence and the modern healing church, so the lack of iconography of this woman here is notable. If we take a look at side-by-side comparisons of the various depictions of her throughout the Old City, we can see that these are in fact the very same character. Since she's clearly a figure of supreme importance to this old religion, let's analyze her various representations. To start with, there are two depictions visible from the very first moments of the game. One composite depiction is the lintel adorning several houses and churches in central Yharnam, but probably best and first seen on Gilbert's house next to the central Yharnam lamp. This lintel is quite fascinating and probably deserves its own episode. Now, there's a TA sentence if we've ever heard one. But for now, let's just point out that this is a composite image showing several characters we will come to see in greater detail in other representations. On the far left, we have the Pietà depiction from Hemwick Charnel Lane. On the two parasagittal frames, we have flanking attendants, replicated in innumerable statues and lanterns throughout the city. On the far right, we have a somewhat generic depiction of clergy, and finally, in the middle, we have the figure of our central female character, arms outstretched in a pose we will soon come to recognize. There are a couple of key points about this lintel. For one, all of the figures are represented in a single depiction, meaning they are all part of the same iconographic set, in other words, figures of a shared religion, so we must therefore interpret them together. And second, this depiction of the central female character is replicated in other forms throughout the city, giving us a clue as to where to look next. Following this trail of breadcrumbs leads us to the Great Bridge, where we can see this identical depiction dotting the spandrel sections between the main arches of the bridge. And they flank a much more interesting depiction, replicated above the arches where the parapet widens in repeated fashion. This again is visible from the very first moments of the game, the beautiful magic hour vista we are treated to upon escaping Yesevka's clinic for the first time. Though, of course, we won't recognize its significance until much later on. Here we have a scene, again with our female character occupying the central position, flanked by two attendants and rows of female supplicants, arms held elevated and palms upturned as if ready to receive a blessing. And if we look more closely at our central female character, we can discover the point of this scene. She is holding a newborn infant. This is a nativity scene. FromSoft have riffed on this before, of course, in Dark Souls 1, for example, with the nativity scene in the Undead Parish clearly showing the birth of the Nameless King, the divine heir. And it's one of the most famous depictions in all of Christian art, replicated and iterated upon over and over throughout the centuries, something we'll come back to in a moment. For now, it just allows us to at least name this character. We can call her Madonna, after the Madonna and Child depiction shown here on the Great Bridge, with this character having just given birth to a very special child, and her various attendants coming to rejoice and receive the blessing of his birth. And finally, we have the depiction in the altar of the Hemwick Charnel Lane, well known in the community to be stylistically based off of Michelangelo's Pietà, although to be clear, the Pietà, like the Nativity, is more of a category of Christian art rather than a single sculpture restricted to Michelangelo. The Pietà depictions, Pietà means pity or perhaps better, compassion, focuses on Mary mourning the death of Jesus. Michelangelo's is merely the most famous version of this, owing to his technical skill and the interesting decision to make Mary and Jesus nearly the same age, deviating from the expected age of perhaps 50 one would expect for the mother of a 33-year-old. By making Mary so young, it evokes her age from when she was first pregnant with Jesus, and from Mary's eyes accentuates the tragedy of this arc. It is somewhat of a truism in the lore community to point out that Bloodborne, as indeed with most of Miyazaki's games, takes Western, specifically Christian, iconography and sets them to a thematic narrative derived from his native culture, with its attendant Buddhist and Shinto themes. But au contraire, rather than being just purely aesthetic inspiration, when seen in tandem with the nativity scene on the Great Bridge, there appears to be a genuine narrative arc developing here, one centered on the mother of a divine child. The developers have made certain modifications to the scene, just as they have done with the nativity scene. It is not merely an attempt at replication. FromSoft are using these tropes from Christian art to tell a very specific story, and the beginning of that story, as it were, is in the Church of the Good Chalice. So let us now return to the moon-scented scene where we began this analysis. As we stated before, this scene shows the funeral, or perhaps exhumation, but we'll get back to that in the next episode, of a great man, with the ceremony interrupted by the arrival of the moon. And if we continue our analysis into Christian iconography, specifically Mariology, we will finally understand the full implications of this scene. This depiction, with the Madonna character gazing upwards as if receiving a message from the heavens, is modeled after the Annunciation of Christ to the Virgin Mary. The scene in the Gospels during which the angel Gabriel tells Mary, or Joseph, depending on which Gospel writer you ask, that she has been chosen by God to bear his only child. In artistic renderings of this scene, often it takes a very similar form to what is seen here in the Church of the Good Chalice. Artistic depictions of the Annunciation tend to have the same core elements, with Mary looking up at the angel Gabriel in surprise. Often she is surrounded by attendants and/or animals. Except in this scene, the divine presence is left off-screen. We only know it's there because, like a good horror movie scene, the gaze of the subjects of the scene are fixated on something that we, the viewers, cannot see. And as we discussed in the beginning of the video, that something is unambiguously the moon. And just as in the Annunciation scene, the moon is blessing this character with child. These three core depictions of the old religion of Yharnam are borrowing, in essence, the life cycle of Jesus, as seen through the eyes of his mother Mary. The Annunciation, the Nativity, and the Pietà. Mary receives the news that she will bear the divine child. Mary celebrates the birth of Jesus. Mary mourns the death of Jesus. It does not take a rocket scientist nor a PhD in art history to see the direct relevance of this narrative on Bloodborne's story. A story fundamentally about the conception, birth, and death of supernatural infants, and the structures of human society and religion that have been built around facilitating this process. The scene in Old Yharnam shows the Annunciation to the woman, Madonna, of her womb being blessed with child. As we already know, the arrival of the moon heralds the birth of a special child. As we are told, quote, "When the red moon hangs low, the line between man and beast is blurred, and when the great ones descend, a womb will be blessed with child," end quote. Echoes of the Gospels abound. In the Gospel of Luke, quote, "And now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus," end quote. Or in Matthew's version, quote, "Behold, a virgin shall be with child, and bring forth a son, and they shall call him Emmanuel," end quote. Of course, we know that in Bloodborne this is not merely prophecy. Upon the arrival of the red moon, Ariana conceives and gives birth to a divine child, if you want to call the horrifying squid monster divine, further establishing the relationship between the arrival of the moon and these miraculous births. There is even a devious reworking of this miraculous birth trope, something which is found in many world mythologies, but perhaps is most familiar to us from Christianity, to imply that the miraculous nature of this birth is proven not by the fact that it is a teenage virgin, like Mary, but that it's a widow, someone who conceived after her husband had died. But ultimately, what this scene shows us, in the oldest part of this ancient city, are the cycles of human surrogates for Great One reproduction. Far be it from us here at Tarnished Archaeology to transgress Catholic dogma. We would never think of doing such a thing. So we'll leave it to you all to determine whether there is some narrative similarity between the story of Bloodborne's Madonna character, the story of Queen Yharnam, and the story of the Virgin Mary, so beautifully rendered in scores upon scores of medieval art. Here we have a teenager who is told by an angel she will not only give birth without ever having known a man, but that that child will be God himself incarnate. That is quite a burden, and one that, undoubtedly, not everyone would choose to bear if given the choice. The obvious juxtaposition being with the story of Queen Yharnam, a woman literally bound at the wrists on her wedding night, and forced to bear the child of a great one. From the blood on her dress and the story details of Mergo, we know the tragic fate of this pregnancy. And indeed, Queen Yharnam's weeping outside Mergo's boss room can be seen as an inversion of the mourning scene of Pietà, or of the Lamentation of Christ. Ultimately, both are of a mother weeping for her divine child, though in Queen Yharnam's case, she aspires to free Mergo from its nightmarish existence. Perhaps this is what it means to be a Pthumerian queen. To be chosen as queen means to hold the ceremonial position as surrogate womb for a great one. As the Ring of Betrothal reads, quote, "In the age of the great ones, wedlock was a blood contract, only permitted to those slated to bear a special child." End quote. Indeed, the Christian allegory can inform us once again. Mary, poor, terrified teenager though she was later depicted as Queen of Heaven by later interpreters of the story, perhaps most famously Dante, which is undoubtedly the inspiration for all those queenly statues found throughout Yharnam and Cainhurst Castle. But in the original stories in the 1st centuries AD, Mary was a scared teenager asked to bear the responsibility of the world in her womb. It was only much later that she was assigned the title of Queen. Longtime viewers of Tarnished Archaeology will by now be either nodding their heads in agreement or rolling their eyes in exasperation, as we've already made 2 whole videos analyzing the potency and narrative salience of divine wombs in Elden Ring's story. And just as Princess Rani took extraordinary steps to escape the shackles of her divine womb, by slaying and discarding her Empyrean flesh, perhaps so too did Queen Yharnam. Her blood-stained dress and slit wrists seem to suggest that she committed suicide rather than carry this supernatural pregnancy to term. We can see in the Chalice Dungeon version of her that she is still pregnant, even though the bloodstains are already there, which indicates that the source of the blood is not her pregnancy, as is often assumed. And she even performs several attacks during which she spews blood from her wrists, in much the same way that the executed noble women of Cainhurst spew blood from their slit throats. An alternative explanation for the blood would be that it was part of a ritual bloodletting from the wrists. After all, she even carries a crisp blade, something that FromSoft have included in nearly all of their games as a ritual weapon, perhaps indicating here that a blood pact was performed on her wedding night. Let us remember the description of the Ring of Betrothal, which refers to wedlock as a blood contract. Regardless of those specific possibilities, in some, the forensics convey her tragic arc clearly enough. Like Ariana, she conceived and bore a supernatural pregnancy in the span of a single night, her wedding night. And as she did not live much longer after this night, only her spirit can take revenge upon those who forced this fate upon her. If indeed, when faced with no good option to escape her fate, she did take her own life, then there are many layers of tragedy to this story that need not be further dwelt upon. As we've said before, these women, Madonna, Queen Yharnam, Ariana, Annalise, and their IRL cognate Mary, are all linked by the concept of supernatural pregnancies. But beyond that, what can we actually say about the Madonna story? What we can say with relative confidence is that she bore the child of a Great One after her encounter with the moon. And we know that Great One progeny do not live long, in the waking world at least. And so too did the Madonna's supernatural child pass away, as shown by her grieving pose in the Pietà in Hemwick. Her story is inextricable from Queen Yharnam's, Annalise's, and perhaps countless other women who have been forced to bear the children of Great Ones. But where her story differs is that the Madonna, unlike the others, would go on to found a religion, as the numerous depictions of her throughout the city of Yharnam attest to. So the question is, what was the basis of this religion? Why, even after her child's death, did she become the focus of the old religion in Yharnam? The answer to that question, our friends, has everything to do with the origins of the healing blood in Yharnam. But that will have to wait until part 2. Join us next time as we uncover the folk religion founded around the Madonna, and how it ties together the story of Canehurst, the healing church, and the cycles of plague throughout history.